All right, let's jump right in. Today, we're going to unpack a fascinating and honestly a pretty powerful metaphor from our source material. It's an idea that might just change how you look at certain emotional patterns, and it's called mother's software.
So let's kick things off with this quote that gets right to the heart of the matter. It says, "She's not choosing to be unhappy, she's just running an ancient script of dissatisfaction." Just think about that for a second. What if some chronic unhappiness isn't really a choice at all, but more like a program just running in the background?
And that really brings us to the big question here, doesn't it? What if some of our most deep-seated emotional patterns are kind of like pre-installed software? You know, a default setting that we never chose, but that just runs automatically, shaping our reactions before we even have a chance to think.
So that leads us right into our first section, The Ghost in the Machine. And it's a great title, because here we're going to explore how these invisible patterns can feel like they're honking our relationships, operating on some kind of code we can't even see.
So what are we actually talking about here? Well, the source material points to this phenomenon where a person, without even realizing it, starts to unintentionally recreate their mother's emotional world. Imagine that. You build this whole new life for yourself, but somehow you end up living in your mother's emotional landscape instead of your own.
And here's where it gets kind of tricky. These glitches in the system can pop up even in what are genuinely good, loving relationships. It might show up as this constant low-grade dissatisfaction that just doesn't make any sense. And this is absolutely key to remember. The person isn't consciously choosing to be unhappy.
Okay, so this ancient script we've been talking about, it actually has a name. In this next section, we're going to put a pin in it and define exactly what mother's software is.
And here we have it, mother's software. So what is it? It's the term for that unconscious pull, that tendency to basically rebuild a mother's chronic unhappiness right inside your own adult relationships. It's like you're mirroring an emotional environment that you learned, and maybe just absorbed, way back when.
This brings up a huge question though, right? It sounds totally backwards. I mean, why would anyone, even unconsciously, decide to replicate unhappiness? It seems to go against everything we want in life. So why does it happen?
And the answer is, well, it's both really simple and incredibly deep. It's all about what feels familiar. If you grew up in a home where dissatisfaction was the norm, that feeling, even if it's a bad one, becomes your baseline. It's what feels normal. In a weird way, it can even feel safe. As the source puts it, sometimes dysfunction just feels like home.
Okay, so if this mother's software could be running in the background for someone, how in the world do you spot it? That brings us to our next section, Running the Diagnostic, where we're going to look at ways to identify this hidden code.
Yeah, exactly. You know, if a program is running silently on your computer, you need some kind of task manager to even see what's going on. So how do you do that for something as complicated and messy as human emotion? How do you actually spot the script?
Well, the good news is, our source doesn't just point out the problem. It actually proposes a method for analysis, a framework designed specifically to help spot these tangled, deep-rooted emotional patterns before you get in too deep. And that framework is called genetic predisposition auditing. Now hold on, let's be super clear here. We are not talking about biology or DNA. Genetic in this case is a metaphor for those deeply inherited emotional patterns. The whole idea is to use this audit as a way to proactively understand the dynamics of a relationship before you're heavily invested.
So what's the goal here? It's really to see the code that's running underneath all the surface-level stuff. It's not about analyzing one bad day or a single argument. It's about looking for the patterns. How does someone talk about their family? What's their default reaction when things get tough? You're essentially trying to find the fundamental programming that sets the emotional climate of the relationship.
And this slide, wow, it really lays out the stakes, doesn't it? On one side, you've got a healthy dynamic, a partnership of mutual investment. Both people are pouring into it, and both people are getting filled up. But then, you have a relationship running on mother's software. And that's described as trying to fill a bucket with no bottom. No matter how much love or effort you pour in, it just drains right out and it's never enough.
Which brings us to the big one, maybe the most important question of all. If you've run the diagnostic and you've actually identified the code, what do you do? Can you just, delete it?
So here's the bottom line from the source material. Awareness is everything. You absolutely cannot fix a bug you don't even know exists. Just identifying the script, seeing it for what it is, and understanding where it comes from, that is the single most important first step. That's the whole ballgame right there.
And so that leaves us with this final, really provocative thought. When you're talking about something this deep, this fundamental to how a person operates, can you really just hit delete like an old file? Or is it more like your core operating system, something you can't get rid of, but maybe, just maybe, you can learn to patch, to update, and to rewrite one line of code at a time? Something to think about. Thanks for tuning in.